The frozen ground crunched under Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho's boots as he moved through the snow. His breath came out in white clouds that disappeared quickly in the bitter cold. The thermometer on his belt read -40 degrees. He had never felt cold like this before. Kim looked back at his men. They were spread out behind him in a line, moving slowly through the deep snow. Their faces were red from the cold. Ice had formed on their eyebrows and around their mouths. Some of them were shaking. Private Lee Jong-soo was at the back of the group. He was only 19 years old. This was his first real mission. Kim could see that the boy was having trouble. Jong-soo kept stopping to rest. His rifle was heavy in his hands. "Jong-soo," Kim called out softly. "Stay close to me." The young soldier nodded and tried to walk faster. His legs were tired, and his feet felt like blocks of ice inside his boots. He wondered if he would make it through the day. They were near the Chosun Reservoir in North Korea. The water was completely frozen. The ice was so thick that tanks could drive across it. Mountains rose up on all sides. The whole area looked like a frozen wasteland. Kim's radio crackled to life. The voice was hard to hear through the static. "This is Captain Park Min-ho," the voice said. "All units report to your positions." Kim pressed the button on his radio. "This is Kim Tae-ho. We are moving to the observation point now." "Good," Captain Park replied. "We have new orders from headquarters. We must hold the mountain pass no matter what happens." Kim felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather. He had been a soldier for 8 years. He knew what those words meant. They were not going to retreat. They would fight until the end. The reconnaissance unit reached a small hill that overlooked the valley below. Kim took out his binoculars and looked around. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Jong-soo sat down in the snow next to him. The young soldier was breathing hard. "Sergeant," Jong-soo said, "why is it so quiet? Where is everyone?" Kim did not answer right away. He kept looking through his binoculars. Something was wrong. They had been told that friendly forces were in this area, but he could not see anyone. In the distance, Kim saw movement. At first he thought it might be animals, but then he saw more movement, and more. "Get down," Kim whispered to his men. The soldiers dropped to the ground and crawled behind some rocks. Kim continued to watch through his binoculars. What he saw made his heart beat faster. Hundreds of soldiers were moving through the valley. They were wearing different uniforms. They were not Korean or American soldiers. They were Chinese. Kim had heard rumors that Chinese forces were coming to help North Korea, but seeing them with his own eyes was different. There were so many of them. The Chinese soldiers moved like ghosts through the snow. They were quiet and organized. Kim could see that they had been trained for this kind of fighting. They knew how to move in the cold and snow. Kim's radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice. "All units, this is headquarters. We have reports of large enemy forces moving in your area. Chinese troops have crossed the border. This is not a drill." Kim looked at his men. They had all heard the message. Their faces showed fear and determination at the same time. Jong-soo crawled over to Kim. "What do we do now, Sergeant?" Kim put his hand on the young soldier's shoulder. "We do our job. We watch and report what we see." For the next hour, Kim and his men counted the Chinese soldiers moving through the valley. There were more than they could count. Trucks full of supplies followed behind the soldiers. Artillery pieces were being pulled by horses. The Chinese were preparing for a big attack. Kim realized that the war was about to change. The Americans and South Koreans thought they were winning. They thought the war would be over soon. But now everything was different. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped even more. Kim's men were getting colder. Their fingers were numb. It was hard to hold their weapons. Jong-soo was shivering badly. Kim was worried about him. The young soldier was not used to this kind of cold. If they stayed out here much longer, some of his men might get frostbite. But they had their orders. They had to stay and watch. They had to report what they saw. Kim got on his radio one more time. "This is Kim Tae-ho. I count at least 2,000 enemy soldiers moving through the valley. They have heavy weapons and supplies. They are preparing for a major offensive." The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then it came back. "Copy that, Sergeant. Continue to observe and report. Do not engage the enemy unless you have to." Kim looked out at the valley again. The Chinese soldiers were still coming. He wondered how many more there were. He wondered if they would survive the night. The war was just beginning. The morning came with no sunrise. The sky was grey and heavy, with snow clouds. Kim Tai-ho woke up feeling stiff and cold. His sleeping bag was covered with a thin layer of ice. Around him, his men were slowly waking up too. Jong-soo was curled up in a ball trying to stay warm. His lips were blue, and he was still shivering. Kim was worried about the young soldier. Kim tried to use his radio to contact headquarters. Static. Filled his ears. He tried different frequencies but got the same result. Something was wrong. Han Jae-won, Kim called to his radio operator. Can you reach anyone on the radio? Han was a thin man with thick glasses. He had been working with radios for 5 years. He shook his head as he tried different settings on his equipment. The radio is working, Sergeant, Han said, but I cannot reach headquarters. I can only hear bits and pieces from other units. They sound like they are in trouble too. Kim felt his stomach tighten. If they could not talk to headquarters, they were on their own. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. It was coming from the south where their main base was supposed to be. The shooting went on for a long time, then it stopped. We need to move, Kim told his men. Something has happened to our base. The unit packed their gear quickly and started moving through the snow. They headed toward where they thought their friends would be. But as they walked, they saw things that made them afraid. Smoke was rising from several places in the distance. Burned trucks sat in the snow. Equipment was scattered everywhere. There were no friendly soldiers anywhere. Corporal Choi Sung-min was walking behind Kim. He was carrying a medical bag on his back. Choi had trained as a medic before becoming a soldier. He was always ready to help wounded men. As they walked past a destroyed truck, Choi heard a weak voice calling for help. He ran toward the sound and found 2 American soldiers hiding behind some rocks. Both men were hurt badly. "Help us," one of the soldiers said in English. "We have been here all night." Choi did not speak much English, but he understood. He opened his medical bag and started to work on the wounded men. One soldier had been shot in the leg. The other had cuts on his face and arms. "Sergeant," Choi called to Kim, "these men need help, but I do not have much medicine left." Kim came over to look at the wounded soldiers. One of them was trying to talk. "Chinese," the soldier said slowly. "Chinese everywhere. They came at night. Thousands of them." Kim felt cold fear in his chest. The Chinese attack had already started, and it sounded like they had won the first battle. Han Jae-won was still trying to work his radio. Finally, he picked up a weak signal. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Dae-jung," the voice said through the static. "Any units that can hear this message, report your position." Kim grabbed the radio microphone. "This is Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho. We are north of the reservoir with 5 men. We have found wounded American soldiers." "Kim, thank God you are alive," Colonel Yoon replied. "The Chinese attacked our main positions last night. We lost many men. The enemy has cut us off from our supply lines." Kim's heart sank. They were surrounded. "What are your orders, sir?" Kim asked. The radio was quiet for a moment. Then Colonel Yoon's voice came back, weaker than before. "I am trying to organize defense positions with the men I have left. We have 3 small groups scattered around the area. The Chinese are everywhere, but we are going to fight." Han worked on the radio, trying to make the signal stronger. He had taken apart part of the equipment and was fixing damaged wires with his cold fingers. "Sir," Kim said into the radio, "we have wounded men who need medical help. Corporal Choi is doing what he can, but we need more supplies." "We all need supplies," Colonel Yoon answered, "but there are no helicopters coming. The weather is too bad for flying. We have to use what we have." Choi was still working on the wounded American soldiers. He had used most of his bandages and medicine. The soldier with the leg wound was getting worse. Choi did not think the man would live much longer without real medical help. The other American soldier was able to sit up. He pointed toward the mountains. "Chinese camp," he said in broken words. "Very big. Many soldiers." Kim looked where the soldier was pointing. He could see smoke rising from behind a ridge. The Chinese had set up a camp very close to them. "We cannot stay here," Kim told his men. "The enemy will find us soon." But moving would be dangerous too. The wounded Americans could not walk far. and in the deep snow they would be easy to track. Han got the radio working better. More voices came through the static. Other small groups of soldiers were calling for help. Everyone was in the same situation. They were cut off and surrounded. Colonel Yoon's voice came back on the radio. All units listen carefully. We are going to hold our positions for as long as we can. Help is coming, but it will take time. Stay alive and keep fighting. Kim looked at his men. They were cold, scared, and running out of supplies, but they were still soldiers. They would do their duty. The snow started falling again. The field hospital was nothing more than a large tent set up behind some rocks. Inside, Nurse Oh Hye-jin moved quickly between wounded soldiers lying on stretchers. The tent was crowded and cold. There was not enough room for all the injured men. Oh Hye-jin had been working for 18 hours without rest. Her white uniform was stained with blood. Her hands were red and cracked from the cold. But she did not stop working. A young American soldier was brought in on a stretcher. He had been shot in the chest and was having trouble breathing. Oh Hye-jin looked at his wound and knew it was very serious. "I need more bandages," she called to her assistant, but there were no more bandages. They had used everything they had. Oh Hye-jin tore a piece of cloth from her own coat and pressed it against the soldier's wound. The man's eyes were closed and his breathing was very weak. "Stay with me," she whispered in English. She had learned some English from American doctors who had trained her. Outside the tent, she could hear the sound of fighting getting closer. Artillery shells were exploding in the distance. The ground shook with each blast. Another stretcher came into the tent. This time it was a Korean soldier who had lost a lot of blood. Oh Hye-jin looked around the tent. There was no place to put him. Every bed was full. "Put him on the floor," she said sadly. There was nothing else they could do. Meanwhile, Sergeant Major Lim Kyung-ho was trying to organize the evacuation of civilians from a nearby village. About 50 people, mostly women, and children had come to the military camp looking for safety. The villagers were scared and cold. They had walked through the snow for hours to reach the soldiers. Many of the children were crying. "We cannot take all these people with us," one of the officers said to Lim. "We do not have enough food or supplies." Lim looked at the frightened faces of the villagers. An old woman was holding a baby who looked very sick. A young boy was trying to comfort his crying sister. "We cannot leave them here," Lim said firmly. "The Chinese will kill them or make them prisoners. But moving 50 civilians through enemy territory would be almost impossible. They would slow down the soldiers and make noise that would attract the enemy." Lim made a difficult decision. He would take the villagers, but they would have to leave most of their belongings behind. They could only carry food and warm clothes. "Tell them they can only bring what they can carry," Lim told his translator. "We leave in 1 hour." The villagers began to gather their most important possessions. Mothers packed food for their children. Old men took their walking sticks. Everyone was quiet and afraid. Private First Class Nam Woo-jin was given a dangerous mission. The soldiers were running out of ammunition and medical supplies. Someone had to go to an abandoned supply depot 5 miles away and bring back what they could carry. Nam volunteered for the job even though he knew it was very dangerous. The route to the supply depot went right through areas controlled by Chinese soldiers. "Take 2 men with you," his lieutenant said. "Move only at night. Do not engage the enemy unless you have to." Nam chose 2 soldiers he trusted. They packed light backpacks and took extra ammunition for their rifles. They would have to move fast and quiet. The 3 men left the camp after dark. The temperature had dropped to -50 degrees. Their breath froze in the air before it could disappear. Ice formed on their weapons. Nam led the way through the snow. They moved slowly and carefully, stopping often to listen for enemy soldiers. The snow was so deep that sometimes they sank up to their waists. After 2 hours of walking, they saw the supply depot in the distance. It was a small wooden building that looked empty, but Nam was careful. The Chinese might have found it already. She watched the building for 30 minutes. There was no movement and no lights. Nam decided it was safe to approach. Inside the depot, they found cases of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. It was like finding treasure, but they could only carry so much on their backs. Nam made quick decisions about what to take. Ammunition was the most important. Then medical supplies for the wounded soldiers. Food would have to wait. They loaded their backpacks until they could barely lift them. Each man was carrying over 60 pounds of supplies. The trip back was harder than the trip there. The heavy packs made them tired quickly. They had to rest more often, which meant they were more likely to be caught by enemy patrols. When they were halfway back to camp, they heard voices speaking Chinese. Nam signaled for his men to get down in the snow. They lay very still and tried not to breathe too loudly. A patrol of Chinese soldiers walked past them only 20 feet away. Nam could see their faces in the moonlight. The enemy soldiers were talking quietly and seemed relaxed. They did not know that UN forces were so close. After the Chinese patrol passed, Nam and his men continued toward their camp. But now they knew the enemy was very close. The Chinese were probably preparing for another attack. Back at the field hospital, Oh Hee-jin was still working on wounded soldiers. More men had been brought in during the night. She was using her last bottle of medicine when she heard Nam and his men returning. The supplies they brought would help, but it would not be enough. There were too many wounded soldiers, and not enough medicine for everyone. The breaking point was coming soon. The Chinese attack came at dawn. Artillery shells screamed through the air and exploded all around the camp. The ground shook, and pieces of frozen earth flew everywhere. Soldiers ran for cover behind rocks and in foxholes. Kim Tae-ho and his men were pinned down behind a low stone wall. Bullets whistled over their heads. The enemy was attacking from 3 sides at once. "We cannot hold this position much longer." Kim shouted over the noise of gunfire. That was when Kang Soonja appeared. She was an old woman from the village, maybe 60 years old. Her hair was grey and her clothes were torn, but her eyes were sharp and determined. She crawled up to Kim during a break in the shooting. "I know these mountains," she said in a strong voice. "There are paths the Chinese do not know about. I can lead you to safety." Kim looked at the old woman with surprise. "It is too dangerous. You should hide with the other villagers." Kang Soonja shook her head firmly. "My husband was killed by the enemy yesterday. My house is burned. I have nothing left to lose. But I know every rock and tree in these mountains." Another wave of Chinese attacks started. Machine gun bullets hit the stone wall, sending chips of rock flying. Kim realized they had no choice. They would either follow this old woman or die here. "Show us the way," Kim said. Combat engineer Seo Byung-ho was working frantically to build better defenses. The frozen ground was like concrete, but he used explosives to blast holes for foxholes. His hands were bleeding from handling the cold metal tools, but he kept working. Seo had been an engineer before the war. He knew how to build things and how to destroy them. Now he was using everything he knew to keep his fellow soldiers alive. "Help. Me move these logs," Seo called to some nearby soldiers. They were building barriers to stop enemy bullets and artillery. The work was hard in the extreme cold. The soldiers' breath came out in white clouds as they lifted heavy logs and rocks. Their fingers were so cold they could barely grip their tools. Seo looked at the defensive position he had built. It was not perfect, but it would have to do. The Chinese would attack again soon, and his barriers might give the soldiers a few more minutes to live. Medical corpsman John Hyun-woo was running between wounded soldiers under heavy fire. Bullets were flying all around him, but he did not stop to take cover. Wounded men needed his help. A young soldier had been hit in the shoulder by shrapnel. He was bleeding badly and calling for his mother. John crawled to him and started bandaging the wound. "You will be okay," John told the soldier. "Just stay calm." Another explosion nearby covered them both with dirt and snow. John shielded the wounded soldier with his own body. When the explosion was over, he continued working on the bandage. John had no formal medical training. He had learned everything by watching other medics and from experience. But he had saved many lives during the war. A sniper bullet hit the ground next to Jeon's hand. The Chinese were targeting medics on purpose, but Jeon kept working. He would not leave wounded soldiers to die. "I need help moving this man," Jeon called to Kim Tae-ho. Kim and Jong-soo helped carry the wounded soldier to a safer place behind. Some rocks. The soldier was unconscious now, but he was still breathing. Kang Soonja was studying the terrain around them. She pointed to a narrow path that led up the mountain behind their position. "That path goes over the ridge," she explained. "It comes down near the frozen lake. The Chinese do not know about it because it is hidden by trees." Lieutenant Colonel Yoon's voice came over the radio again. This time he sounded very tired. "All units, we are beginning to withdraw. The enemy has too many soldiers. We cannot hold our positions any longer." Kim looked around at his men. They were exhausted, cold and low on ammunition. Several were wounded, but they were still alive. "Can you really get us out of here?" Kim asked Kang Sunja. The old woman nodded confidently. "I have walked these paths since I was a little girl. Even in winter, even in the dark, I know the way." Seo Byung-ho set up his last explosive charges on the defensive position. When the Chinese overran their position, the explosives would slow them down and maybe kill a few enemy soldiers. "How?" "Long before we move," Seo asked Kim. "As soon as we can get the wounded ready to travel," Kim replied. John Hyunwoo was preparing the wounded soldiers for the difficult journey ahead. Some could walk with help. Others would have to be carried on stretchers made from rifles and coats. The American soldier with the chest wound was still alive, but barely. John did not think the man would survive the trip over the mountain, but they could not leave him behind. "We take everyone," Kim decided when John expressed his concerns. "No one gets left behind." The sound of Chinese voices was getting closer. Enemy soldiers were moving through the abandoned camp, searching for survivors. Kang Sunja started walking toward the hidden path. "We must go now," she said quietly, "before they find the trail." One by one, the soldiers followed the old woman into the darkness. They carried their wounded friends and what little equipment they had left. Behind them, Seo's explosive charges went off with loud booms. The Chinese shouted in surprise and anger, but by then Kang Sunja was already leading them up the secret mountain path that would save their lives. The mountain path was narrow and steep. Snow fell heavily, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Kang Sunja led the way, her old boots finding solid ground even in the darkness. Behind her, the soldiers moved slowly in a long line. They carried wounded men on makeshift stretchers. Every step was painful in the deep snow and bitter cold. Kim Tai-ho helped carry one end of a stretcher. The wounded American soldier was still unconscious. His breathing was very weak. Kim wondered if the man would live to see morning. Jong-soo was at the other end of the stretcher. The young private had grown stronger during the past few days. The scared boy was becoming a real soldier. "How much farther?" Jong-soo whispered to Kang Sunja. "We must reach the main road by sunrise," the old woman replied. "Then we have many miles to walk to the sea." They had been walking for 3 hours when they heard gunfire behind them. The Chinese had found their trail. Captain Bei In-soo and his rear guard were fighting to buy them more time. Bei was a career soldier who had fought in many battles. He knew his job was to slow down the enemy while the main group escaped. It was dangerous work that often meant death. "Set up the machine gun behind those rocks," Bei ordered his men. "We will make our stand here." The Chinese soldiers were climbing up the mountain path, following the tracks in the snow. There were many of them, but they had to come up the narrow trail in small groups. Bei and his men opened fire when the first Chinese soldiers came into view. The sound of gunfire echoed across the mountains. Several enemy soldiers fell in the snow, but more Chinese kept coming. They had grenades and automatic weapons. Bei knew his small group could not hold them for long. "Fall back to the next position," Bei shouted to his men after 10 minutes of fighting. Meanwhile, the main group continued down the mountain. Kim Mi-young, a young woman from the village, had joined them. She was carrying medical supplies and helping with the wounded soldiers. Mi-young was only 22 years old, but she was strong and brave. When one of the soldiers became too tired to carry his end of a stretcher, she took his place. "I can do this," she said simply, when Kim Tae-ho offered to carry the stretcher himself. The wounded American soldier woke up as they were carrying him down a steep part of the trail. He looked around with confused eyes. "Where am I?" he asked. Weakly. "You are safe," John Hyunwoo told him in English. "We are taking you home." The soldier tried to sit up but was too weak. Mi-young gave him some water from her canteen. He drank it gratefully. "Thank you," the American said to her. Mi-young did not understand English, but she smiled at him anyway. By dawn they reached the main road. It was covered with snow and looked abandoned, but Kim knew this road led south toward the port of Hungnam, where American ships were waiting to evacuate soldiers. Captain Bei and his rear guard caught up with them at the road. 3 of his men had been wounded in the fighting with the Chinese. 1 soldier had been killed. "The enemy is maybe 2 hours behind us," Bei reported to Kim. We must move fast. The march along the road was even harder than the mountain path. The wounded soldiers were getting worse. Some were unconscious from blood loss. Others were suffering from frostbite. John Hyun-woo did what he could to help them, but his medical supplies were almost gone. He was using pieces of clothing as bandages. After 6 hours of walking, they met other groups of soldiers who were also heading south. Everyone looked tired and hungry. Many were wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon was with one of the groups. He was walking with a stick because he had been shot in the leg, but he was still giving orders and trying to keep everyone organized. "The port is still 30 miles away," Yoon told Kim. "The Chinese are attacking all along the road. We must be ready to fight." As if his words had made it happen, they heard the sound of artillery shells whistling through the air. The shells exploded on the road ahead of them, sending up clouds. "Here's snow and dirt. Take cover," someone shouted. The soldiers and civilians scattered off the road and hid behind trees and rocks. More shells landed around them. The Chinese had found them again. This time the attack lasted for 2 hours. The enemy had brought up heavy artillery and was trying to destroy the entire retreat column. Mi Young stayed with the wounded soldiers. During the artillery attack, she covered them with her own body when shells landed nearby. Her coat was torn by shrapnel, but she was not seriously hurt. When the artillery attack stopped, they continued walking south. Now there were more wounded soldiers to carry. Some of the civilians had been killed by the shells. Kang Soonja was still with them, even though she was exhausted. The old woman had saved all their lives by showing them the secret mountain path. 3. Days later, they saw the sea in the distance. Ships were waiting in the harbor at Hungnam. American and Korean flags flew from the masts. "We made it," Jong-soo said with tears in his eyes. The American soldier they had carried all those miles was still alive. He would recover from his wounds and return home to his family. As they walked toward the ships, Kim looked back at the mountains where they had fought and suffered. Many good soldiers had died in that frozen place, but they had survived. They had kept their honor as soldiers and as human beings. The war was not over, but they had won this battle against death itself.